focus at the moment was to work with emergency responders, and we're expecting a news conference with officials from Malaysian Airlines soon. The flight was due to land in Beijing nearly 6 hours ago. David McKenzie joins us now live from the Chinese capital. Are you learning any more there?
We're about to learn more, I feel, John, but certainly the details at this stage very sketchy. The CEO of Malaysian Airlines saying that he's deeply saddened this morning at the news of this MH370 flight that was due here early morning, local time in Beijing. At this point, no idea where that flight may have ended up. Particularly people fearing the worst. 239 passengers and crew on board, including 2 infants, 12 crew members. The Malaysian Airlines also releasing the name of the pilot, a 27-year-old Malaysian with a reasonable level of experience flying for the airline, been with them since 2007. But of course, right now it's all about trying to locate that plane. The biggest fear, of course, is that it has run out of fuel if it's still in the air. But a very anxious time for family and loved ones of the people on board.
Now, there were 14 nationalities represented on that flight, but the lion's share of the passenger are Chinese. Do we know anything about them? Do we know if that was a particularly popular route with Chinese travelers or with Chinese business people?
It would have been a very popular route from KL, Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. This flight was a code share with China Southern Airlines, a major airlines here in China. So packed with Chinese travelers, more than 150 Chinese on board. And then obviously many Malaysian passengers as well, Indonesian, Australian, French, 3 Americans plus 1 infant, and a variety of other nationalities who are at this stage missing, according to, of course, Malaysian Airlines, which is a very popular airline in this region and in general has had a very good safety record.
Now, I don't mean to be grilling you on this point, but it may be crucial right now. We are told, and we're seeing press accounts that say that the search teams that are operating are from Malaysia and from Vietnam. Obviously, China would dwarf those nations in the resources it could bring to bear, especially if they need to search a vast area of the South China Sea. Are the Chinese saying anything about taking part in a search or rescue effort?
Well, the Chinese foreign minister spoke today, is in fact a major meeting here in China of leaders and of the foreign minister. He said he had to rush to leave that press conference to go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So certainly one would believe that the Chinese are very involved in this process, given the fact that also they have so many missing passengers who are on board. So at this stage, we don't know the details of what could have been deployed from the Chinese side. Of course, they have impressive search and rescue capabilities. It all depends on where this plane is or where it ended up. It lost its signal some 2 hours after taking off in Kuala Lumpur, we believe, according to state media, in Vietnamese airspace. But at this stage, it's, you need to know where the plane ended up or is before you send rescue teams to find it.
And just to make this point, but perhaps from a different part of the world and maybe more important, more germane, Malaysia Airlines in the West has a highly esteemed record, a highly esteemed reputation for safety. What do people say about it where you are?
Well, I think that it has that same reputation in Asia. Certainly the last incident that I know of with the Malaysian Airlines was back in the mid-90s. And in itself, the Boeing 777 has a very good safety record. The most recent deadly incident, of course, was the Asiana flight from Seoul through China into San Francisco last year, where 3 people died, and those including Chinese nationals, and many were injured when the plane landed. It had a very hard landing in San Francisco airport. But in general, this plane and this carrier have a very good record, but at this stage we can't speculate exactly what happens. We'll have to wait and see what the authorities say.
That is exactly right. David McKenzie on the line with us from Beijing. Thanks very much. A short time ago, I spoke with the former Inspector General of the U.S. Transportation Department, Mary Schiavo, for her impressions of the situation. She spoke to us from Charleston, South Carolina.
The plane was either lost somewhere, either in the South China Sea, or possibly by looking at FlightAware, which is a flight tracking service which is available on the internet, perhaps over a Laotian jungle or somewhere in those environs. And what's really important is to get to that plane as soon as possible. Given the modern communications and really the truly modern equipped 777, it is highly unlikely that the plane would have landed somewhere else and not contacted them. So it's important to find that plane and find where they are, because if it had, depending upon how the plane had gone down, there could be many, many survivors in need of aid. And so finding that plane as soon as possible is the key.
This is a Boeing 777 we're talking about. This is one of the most high-tech aircraft that are in the sky. Don't planes like that have radio beacons, whether or not they're flying, whether or not any other communications equipment on board is working?
Absolutely. That plane has many different ways to locate that plane. It does have an EPIRB, many EPIRBs, which are automatic beacon, which locates the plane, tells you where it is. There are several ways to communicate with the plane, both with radios, GPS, and also computer communications with the cockpit called 8Mar. So there are many ways to communicate with it, and the lack of communication suggests to me that something most unfortunate has happened, but that, of course, does not mean that there is not, there are not many persons that need to be rescued and secured. There's still a very urgent need to find that plane and to render aid.
How long, let's assume and hope that there are still people to be rescued who just can't communicate with the outside world. How long might it take to find that aircraft?
Well, depending upon the condition of the aircraft and, of course, the emergency locators on board, if the emergency equipment and the electronic equipment and the signals are still able to be retrieved from the plane, it literally should be findable by GPS and by aircraft tracking the signals, very quickly. The question would be is if for some reason those were not working or were not traceable. Sadly, there are similarities, and I'm not saying this is what happened, but there are similarities between the Air France plane that was traveling from Brazil to Paris, which was lost in the ocean. And that was very difficult to locate because of the depth of the water and the equipment. But depending upon the timing, it's possible that this was on land and in some very forested or jungle areas, and it would just take time to find it. So it's not necessarily a given that it was in the sea.
How well equipped is the government of Vietnam? If it's landed, if it's gone down on land or landed, the best guess, and it's only a guess, is that it might be in or near Vietnam. How well equipped are authorities to find a plane?
Well, Vietnam itself may not have the most advanced equipment in the world and a large fleet of planes, but, Vietnam calls upon literally the world's aviation to assist it. It can call on anyone. The United States has assisted virtually almost every country in the world with any kind of emergency or accident situation. And so it's not uncommon to call on other nations to help it search. And in this case, the key is, depending upon, what people think has occurred, is to give it the cue and the clue to go out and start searching. What has to happen is that people have to be out there searching for the plane. So the plane did not originate in Vietnam. It was traveling to Beijing. So Vietnam has to be requested and has to be on alert to go out and search for the plane. And like I said, it's very common for aviation nations of the world, and there are certainly well over 100, to call upon each other to assist. And the U.S. has assisted many, many countries in searching for downed aircraft, and we would in this case as well.
How pressing is time right now? This plane's been missing for several hours. If it's gone down unexpectedly in rough terrain, far from any contact, does anyone involved have the luxury of time, or do the hours themselves matter?
The seconds matter. What's urgent is getting to that aircraft. I had worked on many years ago the crash of Japan Airlines in Mount Otsutaka in Japan. And in that case, it took many, not minutes, but hours to get rescue crews up that mountain to get people rescued. And in that case, as the minutes ticked by, lives were lost. So literally, it's just time is of the essence. Every minute is extremely valuable to get to these people.
Mary Schiavo, the former Inspector General of the U.S. Transportation Department. Richard Quest is our aviation expert, joining us all through this from CNN New York. Richard, we have been talking about this for several hours, and there's a reason why. There are more than 200 people, nearly 240 people whose lives are at stake. But the sense I'm getting is that until we find the airplane, it is just talk. We're just essentially running through the possibilities, waiting for some empirical evidence.
That's exactly right. Until you know where the plane is and you know what happened to it, it is, I suppose, speculation, informed speculation at best. It is not just rampant speculation. The likes of Mary Schiavo and myself have covered these things many times and have seen the sort of the range of possibilities. You always keep your mind open that something out of the ordinary can come. I mean, let's face it, you know, if you look at Miracle on the Hudson, the unexpected can happen, but that is the exception of what happened. The British Airways 777 that crash-landed, BA-38 that crash-landed at Heathrow, by everything that I would have said from experience, that thing should have crashed and there should have been fatalities or at least casualties because it ran out of fuel. The engine stopped. It was starved of fuel, but it landed short of the runway and everybody got off. The plane was written off, but everybody survived. If you look at the Air France flight crash in Toronto, where the plane set on fire as it went down the runway, the plane was gutted. Again, it was an A340. We thought everybody there would have perished. Everybody survived. So you're always, in looking at these facts, Jonathan, or whatever facts we've got, you are always hoping and aware that what you hope for is the best. But experience also suggests that the probability is that something drastic, catastrophic and final has happened to this plane.
And the three incidents you just cited were all within the easy gaze of people with telephones, of people with cameras. The extraordinary thing is that wherever this plane is, it is presumably not near anyone who's in a position to see it and tell the world, or we would have heard hours ago.
Correct. And in the incidents that I told you about, they were all at relatively low heights. The planes were either, well, they were all, one had just taken off, the other two were landing. This was in the cruise. According to the log that I've just been looking at online, about 36,000 feet in the sky, and suddenly nothing more. Whenever I hear of an incident with an aircraft that happens in the cruise, particularly dramatic like 447 or what seems to be like this, we go into a completely different realm of possibility because it's not supposed to happen. The plane is on autopilot. The engines are by no means producing full thrust. The system is not under stress. The pilots are not under stress until the incident happens. So the scenario becomes very different in these situations.
And these are planes that talk. The pilots, the humans on board, talk to other humans. The machines talk to other machines. And at some moment, maybe in the course of moments, but ultimately all of that talking stopped. Again, an extraordinary, extraordinary thing.
Well, yes. The only caveat I would say to that is we don't have the full picture yet. We haven't heard from all the air traffic controls along the route. We haven't heard from anybody else. All we've had is that the airline says it's lost contact, or it lost contact with the aircraft. Now, we know 9 hours have passed, so frankly, that plane is not in the sky. That much I think we can all agree on. That plane is not in the sky simply by virtue of the fact it only had 7 hours of fuel on board for a short trip from Malaysia up to Beijing. Look at the maximum range. It certainly wasn't fully fueled. There was no need to be for that length of flight. So the question now, or the analysis becomes, did it land? Well, we'd have heard about it, frankly, if it had landed at an airport. Did it crash land? Remote areas, we might have heard about it, we might not. But if there was anybody available or possible to get a signal out, we might have heard about it. And then you come to the, you know, the unthinkable. But we're heading towards that position where the plane goes down in water. And in that scenario, you're looking at When will we get a signal from the aircraft's emergency transponders? When will the daylight show any wreckage that there might be? How quickly can search and rescue and search and recovery people get on the scenes? This is a very well-honed plan. There is nothing that's out of the ordinary in the way it will be executed.
Richard Quest in New York. And in the meantime, MH370 with 239 people on board is still missing. Our coverage will continue right after this.
20 men and women join there in New Zealand.
Welcome to my office.
They'll be pushed beyond their limits.
I feel so bad.
While competing against one another.
I can't do this.
In the hope of winning a $500,000 prize.
But only one team will have what it takes to get out alive.
Get out alive with Bear Grylls. Monday nights at 9 on Discovery Channel.
Introducing the new ThinkPad X1 Carbon, powered by Intel Core processors. Professional redefined.
An enormous aircraft, essentially invisible, out of contact with the rest of the world. A search is underway right now to locate a missing Malaysia airliner with 239 people on board. Flight MH370 disappeared 2 hours after leaving Kuala Lumpur. It was expected to land in Beijing at 6:30 in the morning local time. It has been missing for nearly 10 hours. The chief of the airline says he has no idea where the flight is.